Think about this. In just 6 years, a single war completely reshaped our world. It toppled empires, redrew the map, and, tragically, became the deadliest conflict in all of human history. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into World War II. We'll look at the sparks that lit the fire all the way to the brand new world that emerged from the rubble. Just let this number sink in for a second. 85 million. That's how many people, both soldiers and civilians, are estimated to have died. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. We're not just talking about a war. This was a global firestorm. It scorched practically every corner of the planet and left a scar on the 20th century that, well, it's still there today. So, that leads to the big question, right? How on earth did this happen? I mean, the First World War was supposed to be the war to end all wars, and yet, just 20 years later, the world is back at it, but on an even deadlier scale. Well, to find the answer, we can't start in 1939 when the tanks rolled. No, we have to go back further, to the shaky and honestly pretty broken peace that came before.
All right, let's get into our first section, the gathering storm. And that's exactly what it was, a time when the seeds of this huge global conflict were being planted everywhere.
Okay, so what did that long, slow-burning fuse look like? Well, it was like a series of dominoes. It really kicked off with the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. I mean, it just crushed Germany with punishments, leaving the country bitter and broke, a perfect breeding ground for radical ideas. Then you jump to 1931. Japan starts its own imperial expansion, invading Manchuria. A couple years later, Hitler and the Nazis seize power in Germany, promising to make the country strong again. Then Mussolini's Italy jumps in, invading Ethiopia. And by 1936, Germany just rips up the Versailles Treaty and marches its army back into the Rhineland. You see the pattern? Each move was a test, a push against the boundaries. And every time the international community, well, they kind of just let it happen. And that inaction just paved the way for what was coming next.
So with all this aggression just happening out in the open, countries had to start picking sides. The world basically split into two camps, and the battle lines were being drawn for real.
And at the core of it all, you have these two major teams. On one side, you've got the Axis powers. Think of them as the aggressors. Germany, Italy, and Japan, all driven by this intense, expansionist nationalism under leaders like Hitler, Mussolini, and Emperor Hirohito. And on the other side, the Allies. Now, this was let's just say, a very interesting mix. You had democracies like Great Britain under Churchill and the US under Roosevelt teaming up with the communist Soviet Union, led by Stalin. A real case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They had one thing in common, stopping the Axis. And here's something that's really interesting when you look at how it all came together. The Axis powers, they made it official with the Tripartite Pact back in 1940, and they pulled countries like Hungary and Romania into their corner. But the Allies, they were a bit slower to formalize things. They didn't really unite on paper until 1942, with the Declaration by United Nations, and that was after the attack on Pearl Harbor finally dragged the US into the fight. From there, that alliance just snowballed, eventually including dozens of nations, like China, Canada, and even governments in exile from places like Poland and France. Okay, so the stage is set, the teams are formed, and then the war explodes. For the first few years, from 39 to 42, it was all about the Axis powers. They were on an absolute roll. And that roll was just stunningly fast. It all starts in September 1939. Germany invades Poland, and that's the official start in Europe. By the next year, their Blitzkrieg, this lightning war tactic, just tears through Western Europe. I mean, France falls. It was unthinkable. Then, in 41, Hitler makes a massive gamble and turns on the Soviet Union with Operation Barbarossa. And while all this is happening, Japan delivers the shocker in December 41, the attack on Pearl Harbor. And that right there was the moment the sleeping giant, the United States, woke up and entered the war. So let's just pause here in 1942. At this moment, the Axis is at the absolute height of its power. Just imagine the map. They control Europe from the Atlantic coast of France all the way to the edge of Moscow. And in the Pacific, Japan's empire is massive. It really looked, for a terrifying moment, like their New World Order wasn't just a dream. It was becoming a reality. But, and this is a huge but, that peak didn't last long. Just when it looked like the Axis was unstoppable, the tide started to turn. The Allies were finally getting their act together, and they were ready to punch back hard. And this turnaround happened in a few key places that completely changed the game. Out in the Pacific, you have the Battle of Midway. The US Navy absolutely hammers the Japanese fleet, and just like that, Japan's expansion is stopped dead in its tracks. Then, over on the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad. My goodness, a brutal, bloody fight, but the Soviets win and it's a disaster for the German army. A turning point, for sure. At the same time, in North Africa, the Allies kick the Axis out completely, which gives them a perfect spot to launch an invasion into Italy. All of a sudden, the Axis wasn't advancing anymore. They were scrambling to defend. And this is a really important point to understand why they were fighting. This wasn't just about grabbing land. It was a clash of two totally different ideas for the future of the world. The Axis wanted empires based on racial purity and conquest. Germany wanted its Lebensraum, or living space, in Eastern Europe. Japan wanted its co-prosperity sphere, which was really just a nice name for controlling all of Asia's resources. And the Allies? Their core demand was simple and absolute: unconditional surrender. They laid out their vision in something called the Atlantic Charter, which was all about countries choosing their own destinies and working together after the war. Two completely opposite futures. So, with the momentum on their side, the Allies unleashed the final push. It was this massive, coordinated squeeze from all directions. In the West, you have D-Day. The largest sea invasion in history hits the beaches of Normandy. At the exact same time in the East, the Soviet Union launches Operation Bagration, which just obliterates the German forces there. Germany tries one last desperate punch in the Battle of the Bulge, but the Allies shut it down. And with that, the road to Berlin was wide open. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the U.S. is executing its island-hopping campaign, basically taking over one strategic island after another, getting closer and closer to mainland Japan. The Axis is now getting squeezed from every direction, and their war machine just collapses. But the end of the war wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. It was the beginning of a whole new world. And that end came fast. By April 1945, Soviet troops are in Berlin. Hitler commits suicide in his bunker. Just days later, on May 8th, Germany surrenders. VE Day. But the war wasn't over. It raged on in the Pacific for a few more months. And then, in August, the United States uses a brand new, horrifying weapon: the atomic bomb. First on Hiroshima, then on Nagasaki. And that finally led to Japan's surrender on September 2nd and the end of World War II. So the fighting's done. Now what? The leaders of the winning side, the Allies, meet in a place called Potsdam to figure out how to put the world back together. And job one is Germany. They slice the country and the city of Berlin into 4 zones, one for each of the main allies. They kick off programs to get rid of all Nazi influence and to dismantle Germany's military. And they make plans for the Nuremberg trials to prosecute Nazi war criminals. They literally redraw the map, shoving Germany's eastern border to the west. The whole idea was to build something new from the ruins. But here is the great, tragic irony of the whole thing. The alliance that was strong enough to defeat the Axis, it couldn't even survive peace. As soon as that common enemy was gone, that deep, deep crack between the capitalist USA and the communist Soviet Union just split wide open. The partnership that won the war shattered almost overnight, and that set the stage for the next conflict. And that brings us to our final question. The shooting had stopped, but did the world actually find peace? The answer is not really. Instead, it just traded a hot war for a cold war, a new kind of struggle, this time with nuclear weapons looming over everyone's heads. So the legacy of World War II wasn't peace. It was a divided planet, a division that would define the rest of the 20th century, a truly staggering thought to end on.